So, we are going to do something a little different on today's episode. I've been reading Robert Pantano's book, The Hidden Stories of Every Person, and honestly, it's been a blast. I highly recommend it. So, today, I'll be reading one of my favorite chapters from the book titled Everything Happens for a Reason Until It Doesn't. If that sounds familiar, it's because I actually dropped an episode around Christmas last year with the exact same title, where I tackled similar themes of chance, randomness, and the stories we tell ourselves about why things happen. That episode was me pulling from history and my own reflections. But what I love about this chapter is how Pantano frames it in such a way that is kind of thoughtful and poetic. I first came across Robert Pantano through his YouTube channel Pursuit of Wonder, which is one of my favorite channels online, period. I remember watching one of his videos, and that inspired me to dig deeper into this whole idea of randomness and meaning and the butterfly effect and all of that stuff. In the process, I stumbled upon Brain Klaas's book Fluke, which explores the role of chance in shaping our lives and society and history and all of that stuff. It felt like everything I was consuming at that time, what I was reading and watching, was pointing me back to this same uncomfortable but fascinating truth, which is life is full of small random twists that matter way more than we like to admit. So without further ado, let's get into it. Everything Happens for a Reason Until It Doesn't by Robert Pantano. I did everything right. I worked hard. I played according to the rules. I was kind as often as anyone can be. I led a good, decent life. Why then am I lying here in a hospital bed with my house destroyed and my life on the edge of being alive anymore? I was with my wife in our brand new home. After I had recently been promoted at my job, we moved from a rougher neighboring city. Our new house was beautiful and in a perfect neighborhood. We had worked so hard for it, and things were really starting to go quite well for us. Life was at a high point, and I had finally seemed to pull all the pieces together. Then, in an instant, in the most literal sense, the world crumbled beneath me, and my life came crashing down on top of me. Earthquakes are a fairly common occurrence where we live, but most go unfelt, and the rare ones that are felt are typically nothing. We were eating dinner when we felt one hit. We covered under the kitchen table just in case. We waited there for a little while, even after the tremor seemed to subside. Then we returned to our dinner. Then several minutes later, the real one hit. The first turned out to just be the foreshock. A 2.9 suddenly became a 6. Our house folded in on itself, and I was struck with falling sections of the kitchen window. One of them knocked me unconscious, and the other punctured my abdomen. Next thing I know, I am here in a hospital bed. Fortunately, my wife came out fairly unharmed, suffering only a few minor injuries. The doctors discovered that my injury lacerated my liver, though, and caused internal bleeding. They performed emergency surgery upon my arrival. Once inside, though, they apparently discovered that it was worse than they thought. They tried stopping the bleeding, but seemed to have only been able to temporarily slow it down. The doctor said I might still survive, but probably not. They're going to run a few more tests and see if it makes sense to try another surgery. And so I lie here, waiting, thinking about how, throughout my whole life, I had basically always believed that there was a reason for everything that happened to me, or because of me. Everything was always a part of some sequence of reasoning and explanations. I always felt like the things that happened to me were a part of some bigger picture of me. And the things that happened because of me were mostly correlated with my efforts and abilities or lack thereof. However, when I awoke in the hospital and slowly began to realize the circumstances of my current condition naturally, I searched for the reason. The explanation for why this happened to me and what good it could possibly be for. And after trying as hard as I could, I have found nothing. Many of my friends and family who rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news have tried to console me and offer their own insights and explanation. Some said it was God's will. Some said it was my destiny, as if that was a good thing. Some said that everything would be okay and that there's always a reason in the universe, even if we don't see or understand it. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't. As I've thought more and more about it, I've realized that every reason or explanation they gave me was merely a result of their own need for a reason, paired with their inability to find any. They were all efforts to find an exemption from conceding to the truth that there was no good reason, at least none that had anything to do with me. Saying it was a God or the universe's specific plan for me, whatever else, were all but feeble attempts to claim that there must be a good, just reason, despite the fact that there was none in sight. The earth crust moves, and because of this, some rocks broke on the ground, and then the ground shook. That's the reason. And perhaps that's a good reason for the earth, but certainly not for me, who by chance was on top of it in the wrong place at the wrong time. That path has no reason other than the reason of chance, which is no good reason. I wonder then, as I lie here dying in this seemingly reasonless way, what this conclusion means about all the other reasons I thought things happened for. If, to my knowledge, I've never done anything deserving of such a tragedy, how then could there be any good reason for this event occurring unto me? And if there is no good reason for this event, how then could there be any good reason for any event that led to this one? I lie here, looking back at my life, trying to make sense of everything, and I realized something foolishly obvious I somehow overlooked. Every time I said, everything happens for a reason, every time I heard it and believed it, every time I seemingly found a reason for why something happened to me, I never meant that it happened for a bad reason. I meant that it happened for a good reason, a just reason. I meant that there was some considerate order to the universe, and everything in my story was placed there to allow me to become the winner of it. But how foolish was I to think this, that I was somehow special, somehow important, and that somehow the universe agreed and gave me immunity from the fact that no one wins this thing. Of course, I've always known that fortune and tragedy pass no judgment or prejudice on who they touch. There's a history of tragedies caused onto good people and fortune caused onto bad people as proof. And yet, I lived and thought as if I was somehow exempt from what this meant. Perhaps there are others who suffer from this same earthquake who live on to give it good reasons. Maybe they will make greater connection with their neighbors and community. Maybe it inspire them to make great changes in their life. Maybe they will rebuild their homes into something nicer that they've always wanted. Maybe some will even attribute their own good reasons to my early death, and so on. But no one's reason will be mine. For me, and those incapable of finding any, it will have none. I wonder then who is right. Those who claim that something happened for a good reason, or those who don't find any in the same event. I wonder if perhaps both are right simultaneously. Even with everything I've said, I still believe everything in my life had a reason. Not because it had one, but because I gave it one. Because as long as I was still living and observing and reacting, I could give what happened to me, or perhaps of me, a reason for happening. And in this sense, I was not entirely wrong when I said things happened for a reason. But I was certainly not entirely right either. I was right in creating reasons, in feeling them, but I was wrong in thinking they were real, that they were anything beyond what I created for myself to help me through it all. In truth, the events of our lives don't need reasons. We need them. When my wife tells me it's going to be okay, she doesn't know, but she hopes, and I can't blame her for this. It's a curious but truly human and respectable act to hope. And I think I did the same thing every time I thought or felt that anything happened for a reason. It was simply hoping it did, hoping that everything could make sense and that it would be okay. I think in this, everything that seems to happen for a reason is not proof that anything happens for a reason, but proof of hope. Proof that one is still around observing, interpreting, and working to give things a reason out of the resilience and cleverness of the human spirit. But I realize now that at some point for us all, the pen with which we write our reasons will dry up. And when this moment comes, there will be no ink left to write a reason for running out of ink. And so, until then, I say I will lie here writing in this hospital bed, revolting against the hopelessness, creating every last reason I can. There's not a single person who doesn't identify with the central theme of this chapter I just read. If you're lucky, it's some abstract philosophical conversation you can have with your friends over a drink. But if, God forbid, knock on wood, you ever find yourself holding on for life in a hospital after a tragedy, or you know someone in that position, I've always wondered what sort of thoughts would be running through their head. We hear the saying, everything happens for a reason, but we rarely stop to interrogate what it actually means. I mentioned Brian Klaas's book Fluke earlier, which is hands down one of my favorite books I've read this year, and it fits perfectly with this chapter. His whole argument is that life is way more random than we like to admit. Maybe your train gets delayed, or you have a random conversation with a stranger, or even just where you happen to sit in a classroom. Any of these things can completely reshape the path of your life. One of the stories Brian tells is about Henry Stimson, the US Secretary of War during World War II. I talked about it in the episode last year, December. So years before World War II, I'm talking decades before the war, Henry goes on a vacation to Kyoto, Japan with his wife. Nothing major about it, it's just, they just loved the city, they admired the temples, they soaked up the culture the best way they could. Fast forward almost 20 years later, and for some random reason, he finds himself in a room and in the meeting where one of the biggest decisions in history was being made. And that was which Japanese city would be the target of the first ever atomic bomb. And you have to understand, right? At this point in history, the atomic bomb was the first of its kind. Nothing like it has ever been done or seen before. I mean, a weapon that could wipe out an entire city in one strike. Kyoto was on the list, but because Stimson has been there and felt a personal connection, he pushed to have it removed. So Kyoto was spared, and instead Hiroshima became the target. The second bomb was meant for Kokura, but on that morning, the sky of the city was covered in thick clouds. So the pilots switched to their backup plan, Nagasaki. It's so wild to think that just because of some random vacation years before, we're talking 20 years, thousands of lives were spared. And unfortunately, thousands of others weren't. Kyoto survived because of Stimson's memories, while Hiroshima and later Nagasaki carried the weight of history instead. And all of it came down to chance. And that's the unsettling truth Brian points out and Pantano echoes in this chapter. Randomness shapes so much more of our lives than we are comfortable admitting. But where Pantano goes further is in his conclusion. He doesn't say it's all meaningless. Maybe the reason we allude to when we say everything happens for a reason isn't some hidden plan out there in the universe. Maybe the reason is the one we decide to give it afterwards. So here's a man who did everything right. He worked hard, he played by the rules, tried to be kind, and yet he finds himself in a hospital bed. His house destroyed, his life on the edge. And that's where the cracks start to show in the comforting phrase we lean on. Because if everything really did happen for a reason, what possible reason could make sense of that kind of suffering? Pantano doesn't give us a neat answer, which is what I love about it. Instead, it leaves us in this tension, admitting that maybe both sides are right. I mean, the ones who see reasons and the ones who only see randomness. Life doesn't come prepackaged with meaning, but in how we respond, in the stories we choose to tell ourselves afterwards, we can give it one. And maybe that's enough. Not that everything happens for a reason, but that whatever happens, we can still give it one. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share the show and give it a rating too. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the show on TikTok also. Links will be in the description. I'm working on a really exciting episode next. I can't wait to share with you guys. Till next time, stay free.